Hello everyone, this is Sumit Bose and I'm from the Bodhi Academy. Today we are going to discuss on the chapter Kings and Kingdoms. So without any further delay, let's start. Many new dynasties emerged after the 7th century. Okay. Map 1 shows the major ruling dynasties in different parts of the subcontinent between the 7th and 12th centuries. So this is the map. Look, it's Cholas from the southern. Here the Rashtrakutas were there. So different dynasties used to rule different parts of the Indian subcontinent. The emergence of new dynasties. How did it start? By the 7th century, there was a big lords or warrior chief in different regions of the subcontinent. Existing kings often acknowledged them as their subordinates or samantas. They were expected to bring gifts for their kings or overlords, be present at their courts, and provide them with military support. As samantas gained power and wealth, they declared themselves to be Mahasamanta, Mahamandaleshwara, and so on. And sometimes they asserted their independence from their overlords. One such instance was that of Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. Initially, they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka. In the mid 8th century, Dantidurga, a Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiranyagarbha. When the ritual was performed with the help of the Brahmanas, it was thought to be led to the rebirth of sacrificer as a Kshatriya, even he was not one by birth. In other cases, men from enterprising families used their military skill to carve out kingdoms. For instance, the Kadamba Maheshwaram and the Gujara Pratihara Harichandra were Brahmins who gave up their traditional professions and took to arms, successfully establishing kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan respectively. Many of these new kings adopted high-sounding titles such as Maharajadhiraja, great king, overlord of kings, and Trivana Chakravartin, lord of the three worlds. And so on. However, in spite of such claims, they often shared power and their samantas as well as with associations of peasants, traders, and Brahmins. In each of these states, resources were obtained from producers, that is, peasants, cattle keepers, and artisans, who were often persuaded or compelled to surrender part of what they produced. Sometimes these were claimed as rent due to a lord who asserted that he owned the land. Revenue was also collected from traders. These resources were used to finance the king's establishment as well as the construction of temples and forts. They were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead to acquisition of wealth in the form of plunder, the access to land as well as trade routes. The functions for collecting revenue were generally recruited from influential families and positions were often hereditary. This was true about the army as well. In many cases, close relatives of the king held the positions. Prashastis and land grants. Prashastis contain details that may not be literally true, but they tell us how rulers wanted to depict themselves as valiant, victorious warriors, for example. These were composed by learned Brahmins who occasionally helped in administration. Kings often rewarded Brahmanas by grants of land. These were recorded on copper plates, which were given to them who received the land. Okay, these were the copper plates. Okay, the grants of the land were written here, and it would be given to us. Unusual of the 12th century was a long Sanskrit poem containing of the history of kings who ruled over Kashmir. It was composed by an author named Kalhana. He used a variety of sources including inscriptions, documents, eyewitnesses accounts and earlier historians to write his account. Unlike the writers of precious deeds, he was often critical about rulers and their policies. Welfare for wealth. You may have noticed that each of these ruling dynasties was based in a specific region. At the same time, they tried to control other areas. One particularly prized area was the city of Kanauj in the Ganga Valley. For centuries, rulers belonging to Gujara Pratihara, Rashtrakuta, and Pala dynasties fought for the control of. So that time, Kanauj had a great importance. It was the most powerful area. Everyone wanted to capture Kanauj because there were three parties in the long drawn conflict. Historians often describe them as the repeated struggle. Rulers also tried to demonstrate their power and resources by building large temples. So, when they attacked one another's kingdom, they often chose to target temples, which were sometimes extremely rich. Why? They targeted temples to loot the resources, so to take the resources. One such ruler is Mahmud of Ghazni, Afghanistan. He raided the subcontinent 17 times with a religious motive. His targets were wealthy temples, including that of Somnath, Gujarat. Much of the wealth Mahmud carried away was used to create a splendid capital city in Ghazni. Other kings were engaged in welfare, including the Chahamanas, later known as Chauhans, who ruled over the region around Delhi and Ajmer. They attempted to expand their control to the west and the east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and Gahadwalas of western Uttar Pradesh. The Chahamana ruler was Prithviraja III, who defeated a Turk ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1119 but lost to him the very next year in 1192. Okay, now the Cholas we are going to learn about. Okay, from Urayur to Thanjavur. How did the Cholas rise to power? Okay, a minor family known as the Mutairar held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate of Pallava kings of Kanchipuram. Vijayalaya, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas from Urayur, captured the delta from the Mutaiyarar in the middle of the 9th century. He built the town of Thanjavur and a temple of goddess Nishumbhadshudini there. The successors of Vijayalaya conquered neighboring regions and kingdom grew in size and power. The Pandyan and the Pallava territories to the south and north were made part of the kingdom. Raja I, considered the most powerful Chola ruler, became king in 985 and expanded control over most of these areas. This was the Chola dynasty. This was their area. He also recognized the administration of the empire. Raja's son Rajendra I continued his policies and even invaded the Ganga Valley, Sri Lanka, and the countries of Southeast Asia, developing a navy for these expeditions. Splendid temples and bronze sculpture. The big temples of Thanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram, built by Raja and Rajendra, are the architectural and sculptural marvels. Chola temples often became the nuclei of settlements which grew around them. These were centers of craft production. Temples were also endowed with land by rulers as well as by others. The The produce of this land went into maintaining all the specialists who worked at the temple and very often lived near it. Priests, garland makers, cooks, sweepers, musicians, dancers, etc. In other words, temples were not only places of worship, they were the centers of economic, social, and cultural life. Amongst the crafts associated with temples, the making of bronze images was the most distinctive. Chola bronze images are considered amongst the finest in the world. While most images were deities, sometimes images were made of devotees as well. Now we will go to the agricultural and irrigation system. Many of the achievements of the Cholas were made possible through new developments in agriculture. Okay. Look at map 2 again. Notice the Kaveri branches off into several small channels before emptying into the Bay of Bengal. These channels overflow frequently, depositing fertile soil on their banks. Water from channels also provides the necessary moisture for agriculture, particularly the cultivation of rice. Although agriculture had developed earlier in other parts of Tamil Nadu, it was only from the 5th or 6th century that this area was opened up for large scale cultivation. Forests had to be cleared in some regions, land had to be leveled in other areas. In the delta region, embankments had to be built to prevent flooding, and canals had to be constructed to carry water to the fields. In many areas, two crops were grown in a year. In many cases, it was necessary to water crops artificially. A variety of methods were used for irrigation. In some areas, wells were dug. In other places, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. Remember that irrigation works require planning, organizing, labor, and resources. Maintaining these works and deciding on how to water is to be shared. Most of the new rulers, as well as people living in villages, took an active interest in these activities. The administration of the empire. How was the administration organized? Sometimes the places known as Ur became prosperous with spread of irrigation agriculture. Groups of such villages formed larger units called Nadu. The village council and Nadu performed several administrative functions, including descending justice and collecting taxes. Rich peasants exercised considerable control over the affairs of the Nadu under the supervision of central Chola government. The Chola kings gave some rich landowners titles like Muvendalvan, a villan or peasant live serving three kings, Arayar, etc. in the markets to respect and entrusted them with important offices of the states at the center. We have seen the Brahmanas often receive lands, grants, or Brahmadeya. As a result, large number of Brahmana settlements emerged in the Kaveri Valley as the other parts of the South India. So, the Brahmanas were given land, and they settled there. In large number of Brahmanas settled in the Kaveri Valley. Each Brahmanadeya was looked after by a assembly of Sabha or prominent Brahmana landholders. These assemblies worked very efficiently. Their decisions were recorded in detail in inscriptions, often in the stone walls of temples. Associations of traders known as Nagarams also occasionally performed administrative functions in town. Inscriptions from Uttaramerur in Chingleput district, Tamil Nadu, provide details of the way in which the Sabha was organized. The Sabha had separate committees to look after irrigation works, gardens, temples, etc. Name of those eligible to be members of these committees were written on the small tickets of palm leaf. These tickets were put into earthenware pot, from which a young boy was asked to take out the tickets one by one from each committee. So I hope you all understood the chapter. Okay. For more information or details, please contact the Bodhi Academy.